Welcome back to I Now Pronounce You Divorce. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, somebody that's going to talk about how to deal with one of the largest assets we cover in divorce. And, so frequently we talk about people that want to stay in the home. We talk about how you go through refinance. We talk about this. But the reality is, it is not infrequent when somebody has to sell the home. So, Jaimie, can you introduce us to you and tell us a little bit about what you do, and we can go from there?
Sure, I'd love to do that. Thanks, Charles, and thanks for having me today. I'm with Keller Williams Realty, and I serve the DFW area, so Dallas, Fort Worth, and South Lake. However, I'll be honest, because we're a global company, I feel like I'm a global agent, and I actually can work pretty much anywhere in the world. Anyway, I'm here in Texas, and I'm celebrating actually my fifth anniversary as a realtor. But one of the things that I really love about it is just helping people navigate life's transitions with confidence, because real estate is never just about the house. It's about the next chapter, right? My journey with real estate started long before I became a realtor. I bought my first house while I was working as a project manager for a global travel company. And over the years, I've personally experienced the process of upsizing and downsizing and relocating and even right sizing while traveling all over the world. Those experiences, I think they've taught me that every move has a story behind it. Sometimes it's exciting, sometimes it's emotional, and sometimes completely unexpected. That perspective is especially important in the conversations we're having today around divorce, fresh starts, rebuilding after life's major changes. I understand firsthand how overwhelming housing decisions can feel when life shifts, right? Suddenly. And my goal is always to help my clients slow down, look at the bigger picture, and create a plan that supports both their financial future and their peace of mind. I'm able to connect people everywhere in just about any place, right? Virtually or in person. And I always say that, there's no one size fits all. Every client, every family, every future needs a different approach. And I'm excited to dive into that conversation today and talk a little bit about it with you.
Yeah, I am too. I've never envied the real estate side of it, and I'm sure you've never envied the law side of it.
So,
I was telling somebody the other day I went to look at a house, and the real estate agent was very nice, and it was it had had 20 acres or something with it, and he kept talking about this house, and I was like, I hate to tell you this, I would tear the house down, and he was like, oh, and I was like, but you don't have to tell the owner. I said the house would just come down. I said I'm only interested in the back part of this, not the front part.
right.
S- So how do you when you're talking to clients, they're going through divorce, it's highly emotional. Sometimes they get very, very stuck on, hey, I really like that I painted a giant picture of a fish on my dining room wall and I love that fish. And you have to give them the bad news and say, look, we can't sell this house like this. How do you handle that conversation?
Yeah. It can be tough, right? People are so emotionally connected to the things that are important to them. And it's a chapter, right? And, especially, when they're selling their house, that's closing a chapter. And there's a lot of memories and stuff that go along with that. Hey, if they love the fish, here's what I'm going to say. Let's go ahead and replicate the fish. Let's make a canvas of it or something like that, because we're going to need to paint over that. Right? Because when people walk into your house, they want to see themselves in your house. They don't really want to see you. It's not that they don't like you. They don't know you, right? And they're just looking at the biggest purchase of their lifetime sometimes, and they want to see themselves in it. And they're not going to see it with your fish. So let's just go ahead and take care of that now. Is that okay?
They that is, and they won't see themselves. And especially, when we start talking about the changes, yeah, you're talking about closing a chapter in somebody's life.
Mhm.
Divorce means you're closing the chapter and you weren't ready for it. Because 50% of the people weren't prepared to do the divorce. I say by the end of it, 100% of the people weren't prepared for it.
Mhm.
So how does timing and market decisions impact that, right? So they're going through a divorce. Somebody calls you and they say, look, Jaimie, I started a divorce yesterday. Let's go ahead and sell. And you're like, the interest rate just went up 8%.
Yeah.
Maybe not the best time to sell. Let people, even if it stays there, let people get used to it. So how do you have a conversation with people about timing, and how does that impact their decisions?
Well, I mean, so it really comes down to a lot of there's a lot of things to consider, right? Do they have children that are getting ready to start school? And do we have to really think about how that's going to factor in? That may change their timeline. And even though it may not feel like it's the best time to sell, it might be the right time for them. Right. So we try to look at the whole picture, try to understand, is one of them moving for a new job? Right. And they actually need to leave the area. There's a lot of different things that, we can kind of draw that timeline for. So I like to get everything out on the table and find out exactly what their goals are so that I can help them figure out the timing. Because, yeah, that 8% would be really awful for someone. But at the same time, people are moving to Texas all the time and everywhere else because something else is pulling them. Right. And so I just feel like, it's back to my project management days. Hey, let's figure out how we can make this all work together. Let's talk about what that 8% or whatever it might be is going to look like for you. And can we still get the result that you need to move forward with that? And if we can, then let's go ahead and plan for it now. And if not, we'll make the timeline work. And maybe we have to push it out a little bit. Does that make sense, Charles?
It does. And, we frequently run into situations as the attorneys where you'll have one side demanding to sell the house, not so much in the recent time, right? In the past, let's be honest, past 6 years, regardless of what people say financially, is probably one of the easiest times that have ever existed in history.
Mm.
But, prior to that, there's been market downturns that, you would have a market downturn happen like 2008 and somebody goes to sell a house. And you're like, you're crazy. You're about to lose everything. You can't afford to move out of the house.
Right.
So, timing is something that we frequently have to talk about. Not so much in recent future, may come up again in the future. Who knows? I read something from an economist. They said the only thing about downturns that economists should know is they can't actually predict them.
True.
So, one of the things that I always notice when people go to sell a house, and I'm sure that you're well acquainted with this, sometimes one party moves out, another party stays there. How do you handle a situation where the party living in the house doesn't actually want to sell the house? Every time you walk in, it looks like somebody's added more trash somehow to the house than was there before. How do you work with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and it does happen more times than not. And I just try to find out, so if you wanted to stay in the house, right? Because I mean that's ultimately their goal. Is that something we can make work? Because once in a while, and really sometimes we can, right? Maybe it's a situation where, you know, um, the other party is going to help that person, right? Maybe it's a situation where they can't, right? So are we going to have to figure out, how can that person buy out the one that doesn't want to leave so that they actually are encouraged to leave? Like, how do we figure that out? And like I said, sometimes it's a buyout option that maybe nobody thought about. And yeah, it makes it hard, and yes, it puts tension on things, but working with the attorneys, a lot of times I'm very involved, right, to try to help them figure out, okay, I heard this from the person that's still sitting in the house, and I can see this. So let's figure out what else we can do, right? Is it maybe they have some equity in the house that we can actually tackle and do something with. And that might help in the short term to help that person kind of, move on, right? Because, yes, it's harder to sell a house when you have somebody in it that doesn't want to leave. But let's figure out what's going to motivate them to leave. And that's really where I finally get to.
Yeah, and they can be very sneaky about it sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just that every showing time doesn't work. Sometimes it is that they accidentally leave the dogs out of the cage, and dogs go to the bathroom on the floor, things like that.
Yeah.
One of the biggest fights that I've ever had in court, pointless, absolutely pointless, was over the definition of broom ready when it came to selling a house. My client was in the house. They had agreed to keep the house broom ready. The house wasn't selling, not because of my client doing anything. We ended up in court arguing for 2 days in front of a jury over the definition of the phrase broom ready.
Oh my.
And the other side pushed it because they were dead set that it was my client that was the reason. And he was like, it'd be cheaper. I'll just go get an apartment. I'll move out. And I remember everybody's sitting there. How have you handled situations on the opposite, right? Where the client believes it's the person in the house, and you're like, I've been there. There's literally nothing wrong with the house. The bed was, it looked like somebody sat on the neatly made bed. It's
Yep.
fine.
Yeah.
So,
Well, sometimes what we have to do is we have to go grab the data, right? Because, data doesn't lie. It kind of tells the truth. And sometimes you just have to see it that way because you've got some emotional strain between, the two partners, right? And so I'll go and I'll find exactly what's going on in the area and try to help them with that because the house was room ready, right? The person did do the things that they're supposed to be doing, but the other doesn't feel that way because they're probably not there. And I'm here to tell you, we've got lots of tools that can tell us, in that price point, how are things moving, right? Are we getting showings in that particular neighborhood or is there something going on, right? So I just try to bring them back the data and then they can make a better decision. And it maybe sometimes will kind of take that tension away.
yeah, like if the guy next door hasn't cut his grass in 3 years, maybe the
That's
house is clean, but it's that guy.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Hmm.
so we bring up the issues that can arise where one party starts believing the other party's sabotaging or one party is sabotaging. What types of living situations have you seen that tend to work best during the transition?
Yeah, so I mean, there are definitely things that can happen, right? So, and I think that, when you have children involved, it can kind of change things, right? The kids need to stay near their school. That's going to be really, really important. And trying to figure out how we're going to transition them to whatever the next place is for them is really important. And it's something that, I really ask the adults in the situation to really take into consideration because sometimes that's not their it's not that they don't love their children, they're just not thinking that way, right? Because it's their relationship that's ending, it's not their relationship with their children. And so that's something that, you kind of have to kind of peel that back, right? And, does it make sense for one of them to get a short-term, apartment or, short-term house, lease house or something? We can definitely do that. Or maybe it's that they need to go spend time with their family. you know Maybe one of them needs to go ahead and tap mom and dad. There's lots and lots of choices. I do believe that we should all be looking at our kids first. And so that is definitely something that I think that should always be strongly considered. And if that's not the case, you might have some fur babies involved that we need to take care of. I will tell you that homes sell easier when the fur babies are not there. So who wants to go with the fur babies where, right? So, I really think that, we can get pretty creative with that. And it really just depends upon who should stay in the house right now. And sometimes I've had this happen to me, Charles, where neither one wants to stay in the house. And so the house becomes vacant and then I'm managing that house for them as I'm managing their sale. So that also can be part of it.
That's usually the best decision I've seen in divorces. Of all the divorces I've done, it's usually when both of them walk away from the house, sell it, take their equity, and go on about their separate ways.
That's right.
Um, but that brings up an interesting question. When people are going through divorce, it seems like divorces take forever, and then one day they move all of a sudden, and you're done. Like one day it's just like boom, now all the decisions have been made, and you're done. And real estate is one of the areas that I see people usually have regrets for one reason or the other. But
Mhm.
what are some of the decisions that you've seen people make that always seem to end in regret?
Yeah, when they're turning down offers because they feel it's personal, right? I mean, buyers, they're going to come in with what they feel is what they want to do about it, right? And I've seen them, the couple struggle over, maybe it's one of them, and sometimes it's both of them are just saying, no, 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 our house is worth so much more. We did this, we put in the pool, we did all these upgrades, right? And that's just not enough. And I'm like, well, let's just step back because I always try to help people not focus on the sale price, but focus on the net that they're going to get when they walk away, right? And that changes kind of changes the conversation. And sometimes I can get them to take the emotion out of it, because that's really where I'm leading towards, is taking the emotion out and recognizing that, hey, we got an offer, or maybe we've gotten a few offers, right? But usually that one that comes at the beginning is typically one of your best offers. So it's a good idea to really analyze it. And that's what I do. I help them kind of sit back, analyze it, understand. Don't worry about what they've asked, what they've asked for in closing costs and everything else. Don't worry about the sales price because the friend down the street sold theirs for, X more. Worry about you, because right now this is all about you, and this is your asset. And this is one of those things that it's time, right? And you're going to move away from this. So that's kind of how I help them get over that hump, is really helping them see the numbers, because a lot of times they care about the numbers. They're just not looking at the right number. Sales price, not the right number. Net, the right number.
Yeah, I have bought houses and played that sale price game.
Yeah.
Sure, fine. You have whatever price you want, but you pay closing costs. You pay this, you pay that. Repaint the house while you're at it.
Yeah.
And okay, it worked. Wow. I think we bought one house and we asked for they had this pool deck, all the outdoor furniture and TVs, everything. Like we just said all of it. And they agreed, and they weren't prepared to leave all the outdoor furniture and the grills and everything they had. And I was like, that's all.
Yeah.
That was all of it. So how do you help people, when they rush? This was an example that I just gave of the other side rushing. They got a top line number that they liked. We gave, 12 hours for them to decide, the old, you've got 12 hours to respond or I'm walking away. So purposeful rush. The other side where I've seen people rush is they go out and they buy a house. And usually it's the higher earning spouse will just have it in their mind. They're getting rid of a house. They're going to go buy a house. Besides the fact that they're rushing, what other factors should they be looking at when getting ready to rush into this house buying decision?
Yeah. Well, so there's so many things, right? I mean, you do typically have, in a marriage, somebody that, two people, maybe it's two people that are making money. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it is, you have one breadwinner, right, outside of the house, and then you have the one that's managing the house, right, that maybe isn't making the money. So I think it's really important early on to sit down with them and really talk about how this is going to work for their next portion, right? So what's next? Because you don't want to all of a sudden be out of your house and not have your plan ready for what's next. And sometimes it's like, we really have to work on helping one of them figure out how to qualify. And that may mean that they have to, the other spouse may have to give up a little bit on that and not rush. Or maybe they've got to help them financially to make sure that that's going to work for them, right? I mean, so it's really important that now, the two, they were always doing their buying power together, and now we've got to look at the individuals and what their opportunities are and what their goals are, because at the end of the day, they're leaving one another, but they still have to maintain what they need, right? And it's one of those, I always tell them, it's one of the last times that you need to work together. And just think about it. After that, you won't have to do that. Now, if you have children, of course, there's going to be more down the line. But this is one of those last big decisions that you're going to be making together. And that's to make sure that you each can walk away from this and not have any regrets and not feel bad about maybe you did something that maybe wasn't a good idea. And so that's one of the things that's really, really important to do, is understand that and understand what their buying power is, because well, it might not be the same anymore. Right? And so they need to be prepared before we, finish everything, so that they can, agree to it, in your world, right? So that in my world, it's going to make it easier for them.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes that I always see is that the parties will get divorced. They have kids that are like 16. They both do what they think is the right thing. They run out. They both buy new houses in the school district that are big enough for the whole family. The kids graduate. Youngest kid graduates 2 years later. And then they both decide that they don't want to be there anymore. And then they're selling houses. Good for some people, not others, right? So if the house is going up in value, great. Maybe you can cover your closing costs and everything that you've paid so far. but it always takes a plan. If you,
Yes.
the better you plan, the better you talk through this process. I always tell people, contact the real estate agent early. So how much of a difference does it make if you're contacted on day one of the divorce, or if you're contacted 1 week before the divorce is over and they have to sell the house?
Oh man, it can be a huge difference. I mean, because you were talking about planning, right? And planning is so important. I'm always encouraging people, you need your short-term plan and your goals, right? You need a little bit longer term, and then you want to think about what it is, what is your ultimate goal, right? Because you don't want to get into that situation where you both bought new homes and now it's like, well, but that's not the right place or the right anything. We don't really want to be here anymore, either one of us. And now now you've got to divest yourself of that and decide what you're going to do again. And it can be kind of a churn, and you may not do as well on the sale of that house because you've just decided, I'm done. I don't want to be near that person anymore, and I don't need to be in that neighborhood anymore, and whatever. So, but planning early with me is really important with the realtor. And that's because otherwise we don't have time to get all those things organized, right? So, I mean, because like I said, we need to make sure that everybody can afford to be wherever it is that they need to be next. And sometimes they just don't realize what it's going to take. Like, and so I'm helping them with the reality check. I know you're helping them with the reality check to make sure that they understand. They may have bought that one house, and they may have gotten a gift from their parents for that house. You just really don't know what their experience is on that. So it's better to know that up front so that we can plan it all the way through. And I mean, that's going to give them the best result. Otherwise, 1 week before, um, I can get a house on the market in a week, but they don't close in a week, right? There's a lot more to it than that. And being prepared to get to your next place, that definitely takes more than a week, right? So, typically a house closes in about 30, 45 days. Um, but there's a lot of prep work that goes into it, because usually you're getting your lender involved and that type of thing, and that takes a while before we even get to do the shopping, right, for the new house. So yeah, please get me involved early. That having partners is so important for that very reason.
It really is. And, one of the things we try to talk to our clients about is putting together this team of things that you need, right? Are you going to need to sell your house? Well, probably, right? The reality is not a lot of ex-spouses are going to say, you know what? Let me help you stay in that house. I'll just give you 50 extra $1,000 because I'm bored today.
No,
It just ain't going to happen. And
no.
then the other mistake we see people make is they stay co-signed on the house, and then they're running as fast as they can towards a capital gains trap. Because one person moves out, or they're running towards destroying their credit score because one person gets mad and stops paying the mortgage. So, Jaimie, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Like you said, start early, do it as early as you can. Just get prepared that something's going to happen with that house, and maybe you give the advice like, "Good, look, guys, you're never going to sell this house. You better figure out a way to refinance it, and one of you keep it." So, thank you very much. And if you like this episode, please hit like or subscribe. We look forward to talking to y'all next time.